We're going to go ahead and get started for today's conversation topic of the hour, which is how to win in multiple offer situations. And yes, there are multiple offers going around all over the place right now. So I think part of that is due just because we have low inventory. We have a lot of sellers that are sitting on the sidelines. So we're going to have an open conversation between at least Candace and I. And if you've got questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll kind of get them introduced as they come up during our conversation tonight. And if not, we'll end with those at the very end. So go ahead and slip them in the chat and we'll just kind of get going here and talking about multiple offers. So one of the first things we got on here, I was telling Candace, I was like, okay, so as a listing agent, what are we looking at? You know, if you're looking at multiple offers that are coming in, I think, you know, Candace had a listing recently too. It's like, you're looking at everything, not just the forms, you're looking at everything. So yes, we're looking at the forms, we're looking at the periods of time, the contingency timelines, but I think one of the key things right now is communication. So these are different things that on the screen here that you'll see that a listing agent would look at and consider when they're presenting your offer to the seller. So review periods, communication, how they're communicating with you, how often they're communicating with you, whether or not they have an escalation addendum, how they're accounting for low appraisal, if certain things are waived or not waived. Is it cash? Is it financed? Or does it finance, but they're waived their contingency for financing? How much for earnest money and when you are scheduled to close? These are all things that will be very important for a seller when they're considering your offer. So when you're structuring an offer, you want to make sure you put your best foot forward on all of these things in order to win. So we've got several things that we can kind of share. Candace, I know you wanted to talk about communication, so I will let you take this one away.
Well, and this comes back to, gosh, we had this a few years back when things just kind of took off and we had little to zero inventory. It was really all about winning the deal. And so with that, when we had our panel of listing agents, top listing agents, which we at Best Choice have plenty, but when we had our panel, the biggest thing was communication. And I wholeheartedly agree. And sometimes when we have this opportunity, it is difficult. You know, that agent, I mean, I actually had written an offer about 3 weeks ago, maybe almost 4 weeks ago now, and wasn't really able to make that communication and talk to the agent. My thing is, texting is great, but sometimes I'm not able to get the information that I want to relay versus also be able to get more information from that agent to make sure that I am putting my best foot forward for my client. In my mind, I might say, you know, we're doing our highest and best, but maybe there is something. And so I know a lot of times with being able to communicate and that's have that phone call and let them know I've got a buyer who's very interested and we want to put our best foot forward, I'm generally getting some information. So some other things to consider are the backup position. And even today, I've seen, you know, with a busy weekend, we've seen them back on the market. So looking at those back on the market, did you maybe miss an opportunity where that client could have done a backup offer if you didn't win for whatever reason? So knowing that information and then focusing on the facts rather than the feelings with your client and the seller. Love letters is not like a no-no at all. I mean, it's, you know, we want to be very careful in the information that we put there, speak specific to the house, not specifically necessarily about the buyer, but love letters are still allowed here. So bring out those love letters again. And then last but not least, again, texting versus phone calls. I think we might miss our mark, or what do they say? Shoot your shot long by just texting. See if you can get that conversation with the agent. And I found that too, more times than not, when you are communicate and talk with them, they're going to be pretty honest with you. I've had a few agents say, well, you know, I've asked this question, but, you know, are they really telling the truth? Right. And we know that not everybody's always ethical, but I think more times than not, you're getting some good information. So some things to consider.
It's almost like when we talk about texting, I think it's worth bringing up because a lot of agents, especially ones that are new, are nervous about picking up the phone and talking and having that conversation. What I can tell you is that it's better to call. Most of the time, it is better to call. And the reason for that is that things can be misunderstood and there's not an opportunity to add clarification. So I had one over the weekend where she says, I'm not comfortable having the buyer waive financing. Is that going to be a deal breaker? I mean, if it's come through a text like that, I can say yes, I can say no, and that basically ends the conversation. Instead, I got that text message, and I'm so glad I did call her back because I was able to explain the circumstance a lot better and get to the point where it was mutually beneficial for buyer and seller when it came down to actually how the paperwork ran. So pick up the phone. Texting is good for communicating probably when an inspection is. I mean, things like that are probably best to do in that manner if that works for you, but phone calls will be more productive when you're working with a listing agent. In terms of backup offers too, and making it easy for the listing agent, be kind, you guys. There's a lot of people out there that are rushing and going too fast, or they're having issues with their printer. I would think that if I was having that issue, wouldn't it be so nice if the listing agent was kind and willing to work with me and willing to work with my buyer? So lead with kindness and know that, you know, other people, they're wanting to submit an offer, they're willing to, they might be having trouble. Just help them, just help each other out. That's why we're in a cooperative type of MLS like we are. So be responsive, be ethical, all those good things. But yeah, lead with kindness, I would say, is one of the key things there. Escalation addendum. So one of the questions you'll get when you're having multiple offers, and that you should ask the listing agent, is, are you willing to work with an escalation clause? So as a listing agent, make sure you're always getting copies of the competing offer over to those buyers in order to escalate them. On the form itself, leave term 2 alone. Please don't tighten it up. It does actually prevent you from using offers to escalate and win in many cases. So make sure you're careful about that. And then, you know, as a listing agent, just if you have questions about filling out the worksheet, call us. We can help you. Don't be afraid of an escalation addendum if it comes down to when you're having multiple offers. In many cases, it is a really good deal for many parties to use it. Right. And we're seeing a rise of them, aren't we, Candace, right?
We are.
Yeah.
I always say to my clients, you know, if there was 2 escalation clauses that were apples to apples on the escalated amount. So say we were offering the list price of the property was $480, and I wanted to escalate to $520. Party B is also going to escalate to $520, but my initial offer amount is maybe $500 versus the other agent's offer amount being $480. What would make, you know, which offer would you take? Would you take the one that was offering $480, escalating all the way up to $520, or would you maybe take the one that was $500, escalating to $520? And so just kind of comparing to those 2 things, I think that in the instances that I've had it, absolutely, it's up to my client. But our clients do ask us, you know, well, what do you think, you know, and ask those questions. And so in those cases, you know, do I want the one who offered a little bit more, or the one who really just played the whole poker game?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, with those prices and those escalator amounts, you got to make it appealing. I mean, $500 over any other offer is not going to make you win the deal. So you have to put enough of a carrot as a buyer's agent to make it compelling for that seller to take your offer over another. And in terms of like the net price there on line 13, I know at least for me, I don't put just like a flat number. I'm like, just put like, you know, if it's 350, do 350, 500 or 356 or something like that, that already will get your number a little bit higher than the other agent.
Right.
So that's another like quick trick that you could try that sometimes will make or break a deal. Another thing to consider is how you're accounting for a low appraisal. I know this might be a review for some of our more experienced agents, but it's worth bringing up because we're starting to see this a lot right now. We're seeing a rise of low appraisals. So just make sure you have accounted for that. But use a 2280. You know, if your buyer has the ability to come up with the difference and they're comfortable with that, if there is a low appraisal, use the 2280 to pre-negotiate that low appraisal. It certainly does give seller a lot of comfort knowing that when that happens, you already are in place.
Okay.
So if you have questions on how to use the 2280, again, call us. You know, Candace is very comfortable with using the 2280. I've used it many times. It doesn't always come up. That is a common misconception. It doesn't always come up with a low appraisal. This is if there is a low appraisal. So if you have a deal and it comes through and there's an appraisal waiver, I mean, this form is completely redundant in that case. So make sure you have a very clear idea on what your financing situation is for your buyers. To waive or not to waive, certainly the question, right, for most listing agents is what should you waive, what should you not waive in order to get to the deal. Financing contingency, in many cases, some buyers don't need a financing contingency. You know, if they're secure and obviously we want them to, but some cases they don't need to. They're going to close in 7 days, or, you know, I've had a lender, I know Deanne can close very quickly as well. Most lenders can. And in some cases, they have appraisal waivers that are in place. Do you need a financing contingency? So ask those questions of your lender. Do they need an inspection? Or if you do have an inspection, tighten it down. I had an offer came in over the weekend, had a 10-day inspection. We don't need 10 days to get an inspector out to the house. So avoid a counter, tighten that down. I think right now we're seeing on average, and most of the offers we're seeing come across tends to be a 2 or 3 day max on most of those inspection timelines. So keep that in mind. If you're going to have it, tighten it down, because a listing agent will counter you on that if you have a 10-day inspection. We are still seeing resale certs that are coming through. Just review those. You guys make sure that there's a lot of increases that people saw because of insurance at the end of the year on their resale certificates. So make sure if you've got a condo, you're taking a look at that. Your buyer knows what they're getting themselves into. And so you know, I would certainly include it. If you've got a condo, I would certainly include an HOA review just because of that circumstance. In many cases, a lot of condos dues raised considerably at the end of the year because of insurance. So 22T, if it doesn't have a title report, you may want to certainly include it. But if they have it in there and they've got all the exceptions that are on the title report, is it necessary? I mean, these are all things that you can review with your buyer to know whether or not you want to have this in your offer. Form 17, the reason we have it on here to waive or not to waive, there is a 3-day clause that gives you the right to review the Form 17 within the first 3 days of mutual acceptance. So if you sign line 2 on the last page of the Form 17, you've waived the right for that 3 days to happen. So use that carefully when you're having your offer put together, right? Make sure you've considered all of those things to see whether or not you want it. And septics and wells, if you got a septic and a well, contingency, there's the right forms for that. So there's the 22SS. If you're in Pierce County, it's 22WW. And then the well contingency as well. I've had a buyer that called me this morning, one of our agents representing the buyer, where the buyer wants to pay for the septic to be pumped. I mean, they know that they're going to get multiple offers on this. So it's okay to be creative. Just make sure you're using the correct language. Don't be writing your own stuff on a Form 34. Come to us first so we can get you the right language to protect your clients, especially when you're doing things in a more creative manner. It's okay. Just make sure it's done properly. This form that's on here too, if you are representing a buyer, this is incredibly helpful. We have this on our resource site. We have it, I believe, also in Transaction Desk. But if you've got a buyer that is wanting to waive contingencies or has a high amount of earnest money, this would be a helpful sheet to review or to give to them that explains what that means. So, I mean, if you ask if you asked even my brother, right, and he's bought and sold many properties and talking about, do you want a appraisal contingency or no? He'd be like, well, what does that mean? I don't understand. And so he would be a perfect example of someone to just review that real quickly and say, well, without this contingency, a buyer may be unable to close and seller keeps the earnest money. You can explain it clearly to them so they understand what that means when they have it and when they don't. So use it as a tool. It's not required to use, but it's meant to be as a tool for you to help you with those conversations with your clients. Yes, so cash versus no financing contingency. So cash seems to be king in many cases, but sometimes it's not. Many finance offers can very much compete with cash. You just have to be careful and use the correct forms and structure it the right way. So when you're working with cash, and this might be a review, but if you've got cash, use the 22EF, disclose how the cash is coming to you. So if it's coming from a 401k, if it's coming from a loan, wherever the cash is coming from, just disclose where it is. Cash can close quick. They don't have appraisal. Oftentimes, and this is what we're seeing a lot right now as a listing agent, we're seeing a lot of lowball cash offers. So they seem to think cash is king, and so they're offering considerably below list price. So this is happening a lot with properties right now. So if you've got cash, no, you don't want to anger the seller and make them upset because it's offensive. If you've got cash, make sure it makes sense. Offer them a value that maybe do a CMA. Make sure that the value is there in the property so that you don't upset the seller. Because what we're seeing is when you lowball a lot, listing agents and sellers will just outright reject. So try and get the counter. If you're going to do a lower than list price, you're looking to get the counter. No financing contingency. Again, you're still going to use that 22EF. There's a term on there that selects how you're doing the loan. In the other section, you can write movement mortgage or caliber. I mean, you can write whatever loan or bank that they're using. You can indicate that on that other section. If they're needing closing costs, you can put it in the 22D. But I mean, most of the time when you're waiving your financing, they're often paying for their own closing costs in those scenarios. When you're waiving your financing contingency, there is no appraisal contingency. So the buyer would have to come up with the difference if there was a low appraisal. Just make sure that you touch base with your lender. The lender you have to be very, very close with when you're doing a no financing contingency. The other option to compete with cash is just to shorten that timeline up like nobody's business. If they're underwritten pre-approved and they have an appraisal waiver, they can close I mean, Deanne, you could speak to this, right? They can close quick, right? There should be no reason why we need to be having a 30, 45-day loan. When you have underwritten pre-approved, appraisal waiver, they can close quick.
It's very true. And everyone loves loans to close quickly.
Yeah. Yep. And that it can happen. I mean, let's look at that closely, talk to your lender, see what's possible, and see if we can tighten those timelines down. Use term 2B. I had an agent, I think I read you guys the text message where she didn't understand what term 2B was. And she thought that it was waiving her financing contingency for her buyer. It's not. So as a buyer, know that form, that 22A, know that form well enough to be able to explain to this listing agent that we are automatically waiving our financing after this day. So if you have questions on that 22A, let me know. I had to educate this agent who's been in the business over 20 years on what that term was yesterday. And so lead with kindness, lead with, and be nice about it. But at the same time, put your best foot forward with your clients. It is old-fashioned, in my opinion, to use 2A, use 2B. It's just easier, less hassle, less paperwork. Just use term 2B. And then the lender, I know Deanne does this for all of her loans, but if you're working with a good lender, they should be calling the listing agent if you're in multiple offers to basically present that buyer to the listing agent and all of their best terms. And I know we talked about that, I think a week or so ago on a previous call, but what questions you should ask your lender as a listing agent in those scenarios. But it's they should be calling. And if not, then make sure your lender is. So you might want to touch base with them if they're not already. Sometimes it's helpful, in addition to a pre-approval letter. I know I've seen some buyer's agents that they'll accompany like literally a screenshot of their down payment. If they're putting a considerable amount down, they're like, we have the cash in our bank account, black out the account numbers. We literally have the down payment ready to go. So some people will do that in order to compete. Some in order to compete also with closing costs, if they need closing costs, which we're having a lot with entry-level buyers, it's very competitive in the $400,000 price point right now, you guys, very competitive. So in order to compete with that, a lot of buyer's agents we did this a lot, I think in 2016, right, Candace, where we would tack the closing costs on top of the purchase price.
Yeah.
So if you have a $350 price point and you need closing costs, do $355, do $358 purchase price and ask for the closing costs that way. So that way the seller gets their net, but the buyer gets their closing costs paid for. Right. So as another strategy you could use in order to compete with those cash, especially with those first-time home buyers. And then appraisal contingency, utilizing that 22AD as much as we can. So it is possible to compete with cash. Don't feel like you failed before you've even begun, because it's certainly able to do. In many cases, sellers are willing to work with finance because many times they can actually make more money. These cash buyers are lowballing a lot. And you've seen that too, right, Candace? I think you've even had a couple on your listing.
Yeah, well, and then even having, but communication is still key. It's still key. Yeah.
Yeah, all of these terms just have to convey, right? So call the listing agent, see what they want, what they need, and base the forms and the language around what that seller is looking for. With multiple offers, I know typically 1% is pretty standard for an earnest money amount, but with multiple offers, we can see more. So in many cases, it could be much higher, 3% in many cases. I know 5% seems high. Depends on if it's land. I mean, typically they'll do a higher earnest money amount for some of those, but consider increasing the earnest money amount. That can make a deal. If you've got an offer that is, only has, $3,000 for earnest money, and the house is an $800,000 house, is that even going to cover the mortgage for being off the market for 1 month? So as a listing agent, as a seller, that's what they're thinking of. I am taking this home off the market for you. If you can't perform, what is my recourse for having that home off the market? I paid my mortgage, I paid for staging. You have to think about that as the seller. Non-refundable earnest money, just please use the best choice form. It's on Transaction Desk. We've made it very easy for you guys to use, because there's a lot of people that will just put earnest money to be non-refundable, and that is not appropriate to use. It doesn't protect your buyer, it doesn't protect your seller. It's best to have the attorney approved language, which is a full paragraph. So just make sure you've prepped yourself for that. And then it's deposited with closing agents. So we don't hold earnest money. There's been some conversation. I was joking with Candace today. We had an agent who's using a check, and I was like, oh, okay. Haven't seen one of those in a while, but if that's how we got to get the earnest money deposited, let's get it deposited. Let's get it and indicate the right one. I think Candace you were saying to use both.
Yeah, I mean, I think my computer now auto fills it, but just in case, I've had circumstances where they were going to use a check, but the check, they're in the middle of moving, and then they had to switch it to wire. You don't want to have to go and fill out a whole new purchase and sell or add a 34 addendum because you have changed the way the funds are going to be coming over. So I do wire/check, and I think that covers both, just in case.
Yep. And it's quick. I mean, most they've got all these little apps, things that deposit earnest money too. I mean, make it easy. Make sure it's deposited with the closing agent. Here's the only ones I think right now that are holding the earnest money tend to be builders. So if a builder is holding earnest money, that's not entirely uncommon, especially if it's one of the big national ones, but otherwise it should be deposited with the closing agent. So with Chicago, with First American, any of those companies that we tend to work with in this marketplace. closing date. So I know if I were representing a buyer and Candace was the listing agent, that would be one of the first questions I would ask. Even if I've got cash, even if I've got, a home sale contingency, I would say, hey, Candace, I've got a buyer. I'm wanting to, they're very interested in this property. What are you looking for, as the seller? And, for you, Candace, what would you say in that scenario?
I mean, in the case where it's like really important, or like right now, I've got one, my buyer actually does not need a quick closing. What's most important is that they have something about 45 days and maybe like a 1 to 2 day rent back.
Yeah. Okay. So if I know that as a buyer's agent, I go, oh, well, would a rent back work well for you? How long would you guys need? I think that actually might work perfect. So, and she'd say, absolutely, right? So in that scenario, I know price is not everything here, but if I make it so easy for those sellers to move out, I might just get the deal. So, using a rent back, leveraging it in that way, give them the month, give them 2 months, give them plenty of time to move out. Just the moving costs alone, or finding a place to rent temporarily, or the hassle of moving twice, sellers don't want to deal with it. So make it easy for them so that they can move out of the property. What I can tell you though, to protect your buyers with rent backs, if you're offering the seller to occupy after closing, you can do a $0 rent. Yes, you certainly can. Just be careful that after a certain period of time, you enter into the other section that afterwards, after this date to be, and then you can put the amount monthly per diem or per month or something like that. That way, if they stay late, we don't want to have a squatter on our hands, but protect your buyer in that way. It'll make them feel comfortable that at least their mortgages are taken care of if they have an extra day or two.
Right.
In terms of, so we talked about possession, flexibility. If you've got a home sale contingency, you got to watch those dates. I learned that early on with one of my first deals that I put together, which had a home sale contingency, and it has in there when the closing date is, and it's not the same day as the closing that you would think. It is actually a couple days later. So you want to watch those dates, be in communication with those agents to make sure you are all on the same page of when that closing date is going to occur. And if you need to extend, it's best to kind of already arrange for that with rent backs, or already arrange for that extension ahead of time. So have that communication early. And then personal belongings. I know we're starting to see a little bit of this too, where people are moving into garages. If you are, just make sure you talk to Candace, talk to me. There is some extra language we want to see on those extensions if you're having those flexible move-in situations where the sellers are keeping their stuff in the garage for a day or something like that. Let us know when those crop up. And I think review periods. Yeah. So if you've got a buyer who's submitting an offer, multiple offers, maybe do a CMA. If you've got home sale contingency, show the CMA to the listing agent so that they can see the value. We had a buyer I was working with over the weekend that I showed a home with over in Body Lake, and they would be contingent. It's a $850 price point. And for them, in order to win that type of scenario, they ended up not offering on the home. But if I had offered on that house, I would have supplied them the CMA for their house out in Eagle, Idaho, to show that they were selling a home of equal value in order to buy this home. So it's not like it's a move up buyer that would affect their financing. It's basically apples to apples. They're trading homes basically. And that makes sellers feel comfortable. They understand, oh, okay, that makes sense. I'm in that situation too. I'm having to buy a home contingent as well. So it puts the sellers in a state of understanding when you do those CMAs. Buyers, make them feel comfortable too. If you're having to escalate in price, do a buyer CMA, run a quick one, just see if what's going on in that market, in that area. So that way they feel comfortable about not overpaying, not overspending. And again, Candace is talking about communicating with the listing agent at all times. Just keep that low mode of communication throughout the entire process. We had one of our agents that came in for contract class, and many of you have attended our contract negotiation class before, and he's been in the business a long time. And so during the practice, multiple offer scenario, he's going ring, 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 ring. Like every 5 minutes, he's calling the listing agent who is our instructor, right? And what you can learn from that, though, is that he had good communication throughout the entire process. Hey, I just sent you the offer. I just want to make sure you received it. Hey, I'm going through this offer before I send it to you. I want to just confirm a couple things before I get this over to you. Having good communication with your seller, with your buyer, with the listing agent is all very key. And then, this is a question too we're encountering right now, is to have a review date or to not have a review date. Candace, what would you say if you have a buyer or a seller who wants to do a review date or not do a review date?
Well, I think I always look at the circumstance. And so actually we just went over this today. Our agent wants to have an offer review date, and mainly because the seller is still living there and he's going to be vacating for a couple days. She's going to do the open house over the weekend and get as many people into the properties. In that case, in that scenario, it makes a whole lot of sense. If you are if you're pricing right, put in the review date. But two, make sure that your seller's on board and understands too what this means. You're basically drawing all the offers to the yard. You're saying, hey, here we are, come look at this lovely house. You've got this amount of time, and we're trying to get as many people through so that we can take a look at it. Offer review dates don't go so well when the pricing is not competitive. And so, and I've had it before, my seller's thinking, okay, well, we've got this price, great, let's do an offer review date, and then you have nothing, right? Nothing in hand on Monday. So just know the market, know, information, make sure you're pricing it right, and then talk that out with your seller, because it can go both ways on the offer review dates. But we are seeing quite a few of them now lately, and we are seeing inventory go down. So that is definitely making some competition.
Yeah. And I would say too, as a listing agent, if you don't have offers and you have a review date by Monday and you don't have any offers by Sunday night, you rip that thing off. Don't go into Monday and Tuesday with a notation in the agent only remark saying multiple review date on this date and you don't have anything in hand, because it just isn't kind of embarrassing in a way when you've got people who are ramping up for the next weekend and seeing that and being confused. So and then in terms of review dates, we're not seeing 2 weeks in advance for a review date as a listing agent. If you're going to do a review date, it's just over the weekend, just to collate everything that could come in. Okay, perfect. And I think that took us through most of the questions that we had here. And Patty said, yeah, be careful with checks. Yeah, that's certainly something to consider. There's a lot of people out there that are kind of playing and meddling in real estate. So be careful. And then it's on the rise. Don't be afraid of multiple offers. Oftentimes you can get a good deal for everyone. Sellers are willing to actually budge more than they were during our previous multiple offer craze of 2020. So it's not scary out there. If you need help wanting reviews or want us to take a look over things before you send it over, or even one of those CMAs, Candace and I are happy to review those. And I know Rochelle is as well. So I hope this was helpful for you guys tonight. I know we've got some more trainings coming up this next week. We've got a waterfront class actually in person at our Tukwila office this week. So if you're thinking you might have a waterfront property or wanting to dive into that this next year, we've got an excellent waterfront class by Rainier we're putting on this week. You might want to attend that. And I know we've got, Candace, I think we've got some other mastermind groups as well. If you are interested in being in a mastermind group, give Candace a call. I know we've got a group that is just now forming. They could use an extra brain or two to be involved in that. I know that I get a lot out of masterminding with other agents as well. So let's learn from each other. That's how we always tend to learn best. So have a good week, you guys. Is there anything else I missed, Candace, that we need to pipe in?
No, that's it. Okay. The masterminds, they're 1 hour, 1 day a month. So yeah, so if anybody is interested, please reach out and let me know.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think that's it. Thank you guys. And we'll see you guys this next Monday if we don't see you with the waterfront class this week.